Hold that frame. Enhance. Ladies and gentlemen, we got him. Welcome back, nerds. Fino here. You ever wonder who those guys in Raikou's NP are? Well, they're Raikou obviously, but they're supposed to be stand-ins for 4 retainers. I'm sure you're all familiar with Gintoki and his massive abs, but now we get to see who's the sword guy. That would be Watanabe no Tsuna. He's a 4-star saber introduced in the Heian-kyo story chapter, which occupies a place between Lost Belt 5 and 6. It's also coming very soon. Tsuna here is going to be on rate up as a consolation prize on the Doman banner. Unlike Doman though, Tsuna is general pool, meaning you can look forward to getting spooked by him for years to come. If you're here to lick your wounds, you may be wondering if your new friend is any good. Let's find out. Leading off Tsuna's kit is Eternal Arms Mastery, Anti-Demonic. It's a 3-turn buff to Buster Star Absorption and a 3-hit crit damage effect. With a 5-turn cooldown, it's up quite often. Having a hit-based crit buff is a bit of a double-edged sword. It mitigates low roll since it won't eat your buff if you whiff the crit, but it also prevents you from, say, lucking into 2 consecutive turns of enhanced double buster crits. Multi-turn absorption is pretty nice though. Tsuna has 2 buster cards, and provided you can find some stars for them, you're in good shape. Pretty decent start. I'm sure it'll synergize just fine with the next skill. That would be Follower of Varuna, which provides 1-turn buffs to evasion, NP gain, and arts absorption. Oh, that's weird. But Tsuna does have a pair of arts cards to leverage, so yay, I guess. Now the NP gain might have you salivating, but I regret to inform you that, well, you're not going to be assembling any arts brave chains if you know what I mean. My opinion is that in most situations where you'd want to run Tsuna in the first place, you're better off holding this for its evasion than spending it trying to refund. Rounding out Tsuna's kit is, oh my god, Slash of Ichijo Modoribashi. Probably a good time to mention that as of this recording, Tsuna's kit name isn't finalized in English yet, so you may see some variants. Now we had a Buster Absorb and an Arts Absorb, so logically our next stop is a Quick Absorb. Of course! We found the new Geronimo. Funny as that would have been, it's actually a 3-turn Buster buff and sure hit, also AoE crit chance down. These are pretty decent effects, especially given their duration. That's a 40% Buster buff. Now ironically, Tsuna's prey of choice actually doesn't use evasion that often. They typically go for defense buffs, guts, or just raw dogging. But what is Tsuna supposed to hard counter? To find out, let's look at his Noble Phantasm. Oeyama Bodaikisatsu is a single target buster attack with bonus damage against Oni. Overcharges special damage versus demonic enemies. That part persists for the rest of the turn, letting you enhance your brave chains. The anti-Oni effect is fairly niche. Only the 2 Ibarakis, Kyokoyo and Summer Ibuki, are classes he has advantage against in the first place. They show up as event bosses from time to time, but it's not the most common thing in the world, though there are also mid-boss type Oni on occasion. You could throw them against some of those. But what you may have noticed about that anti-Oni effect is that it's pretty fucking big, so hypothetically you could actually fight neutral enemies with it. You still wouldn't want to fuck with someone like Archer Tomoe, but otherwise you could throw him at the pool of Oni, small as it is. But what if you're trying to use Tsuna as a generic saber? Here's where you encounter your first major problem. Without his trait or append bonuses, Tsuna gets blown out of the water by both Saber Hokusai and the upcoming Santa Karna. And it's not like an NP5 versus NP2 sort of deal either. This holds true even if Tsuna is an NP5 himself. If you get his demonic buff online, he fares slightly better, actually dealing more damage than either. But consider this. An NP5 Tsuna with the demonic bonus only does around 4k more raw damage than Hokusai. Hokusai is an art servant who has a substantially easier time cycling her NP than Tsuna, a buster servant. One with no battery at that. And she can run things like Black Grail with impunity. So in practice, unless you find an enemy with the Oni trait, or both Oni and demonic, you're probably losing damage over multiple turns, even with a really strong Tsuna. But you might think, buster against arts. That's apples to oranges. Alright, fine. Let's compare him to Rama, who's probably his closest competitor. Tsuna does slightly more traitless damage at NP4 and above, but Rama does more against just demonic enemies. And of course Tsuna gets an edge once the Oni trait comes into play. Generally, I'd say Tsuna is the better servant since he has fewer dead weight skills, but given that Rama is an antiquated Arc 1 4-star, one without Fate Stay Night super buff privilege, you'd kinda expect that to be the case. More alarmingly, Tsuna himself looks an awful lot like one of those Arc 1 servants, given that he's specialized against a very narrow set of enemies, he wants to manually cycle between Buster and Arts phases to get his NP back, and on top of this he wants to crit, but lacks his own star generation. Suffice to say, if you plan to use Tsuna at all, you should pack some form of star generation. Equip your allies with stardoms like Hide Hunter, or continuous income effects like Fragment of 2030. Otherwise, consider party members with either of those effects. Merlin has his Garden of Avalon and Hero Creation to lean into the buster crits that you do get, and Koyanskaya can't help him loop since he has no battery, but she can dump out crit stars and cooldown reduction, letting you get a second round of his buffs quickly and giving out some much needed rocket fuel. Just make sure whatever you're fighting dies quickly or you'll stall out. Especially at low NP levels, you may find some success in ignoring Tsuna's NP and playing around his multi-turn buffs instead. Grab a summer PP off your friends list and use the Mages Association Mystic code to fish for his 2 buster cards. Lock it in and then use BB's flat star generation to fuel his crits. Budget players can pair this combo with Anderson. The only downside is that you'll expend your crit buff before Faceless Moon ends, but that's just how it is with hit-based buffs. Doubly unfortunate, the lack of a 3B deck makes Tsuna's gameplay a bit awkward since you can't get all 3 crits on buster cards. You need his Noble Phantasm to actually get a Buster Brave Chain. There is a silver lining though. Tsuna gets an indirect buff from a future mechanics change. This is a QAB chain. On the NA server, this is disgusting and pointless, but on JP, it's actually one of the best options you get. That's because when you have a chain with all 3 card types, it's called a Mighty Chain, which gains the first card bonus for all 3 types: Quick, Arts, and Buster. On top of its usual star generation effect, the quick bonus also increases your crit chance by a flat 20% on every card in that chain. So even if you're not going heavy on star income, you can still fish for crits. Tsuna is by no means a soloist, but if your run goes sour and he's the only one left on the field, you can run through some Mighty Brave Chains to try and close it out before he gets KO'd. Also nice for Tsuna is that he has the anti-berserker Append skill, which is one of the more useful types to have. Given that regular Ibaraki, Summer Ibuki, and Kyokoyo are both Oni and Berserkers, he can absolutely dumpster them. I will note that the Da Vinci Summer event has a challenge quest where you fight the dinosaur, though I forget if it has any anti-Tsuna mechanics. It's been a while. But hey, maybe if they bring back the Rashomon event with a sadistic difficulty version of Ibaraki, we could push this guy to his limits. Tsuna has a Bond CE that gives your party bonus damage against demonic and Oni enemies, but given that Tsuna has almost no party utility in his kit, you're better off avoiding this. Unless you want to see his most famous support trick of reducing enemy crit chance and then stealing all the stars to reduce his own teammates' crit chance. Critical non-proliferation. But if you're looking for practical CEs, I'd recommend Golden Sumo to make up for Tsuna not having a standard attack buff of his own. Just time travel back to 2018 and get one. Easy. Just ray shift. You do it all the time. That aside, maybe consider the usual buster crit options like Joint Recital and Company. Hybrid Arts Buster CEs aren't the most optimal picks in my experience, but there's a good chance you have a few and they work with Tsuna's kit. Scenic Beauty has a star dump and full attack stat investment for a self-contained package. It was also a free craft essence. If you went hard on Seitanai, you may have a few copies of Welcome to Oniland, which I'd consider the high-end pick from this category. It comes with starting charge for a faster first NP. For command codes, you can go with any number of crit damage codes since Tsuna does all the absorption for you, something like Blades of Nintendoraku. But if you're feeling cheeky, consider some flat star codes. Colossal Trojan Horse of Obliteration is coming down the road, and it has the added effect of removing an attack buff from your target, and a number of major Oni have generic attack buffs, so that's a win-win. If you want to be even cheekier, there's the Dark Disciples Command Seal, which purges a defense buff. Given that defense is the only part of Ibaraki's kit Tsuna doesn't have an answer to, you can incorporate it for a more complete bullying experience. Finally, you've got a few anti-demonic command codes like Wisteria-scented Lady of the Court. While Tsuna isn't abysmal or unusable, few servants are, I'd have hoped that we stopped getting Year 1 servants at some point. And Tsuna is very much in that tradition. A beatstick with an overly focused niche, mixed bag fundamentals, and ultimately worse bang for your buck than 2 welfares from the same year. Early on you can get mileage out of this kind of servant, but the fact of the matter is that hitting enemies 2 or 3 times with a weaker but more flexible NP from someone like Hokusai is a much more splashable strategy and doesn't shoehorn you into the anti-demonic or anti-Oni niche. So should you roll for Watanabe no Tsuna? The short answer is no, not in isolation. But that's not really the question you're asking, is it? No, you're wondering how this affects Doman's banner. Tsuna's just a consolation prize. Well, if you want to know, subscribe and stick around because the weird pervert man is next. In the meantime, consider watching this video I did on Ibuki Doji, the other new servant from Hankyo.